What is documentation? Aren't we always asking for it? Well, we're going to talk today about what it is and how it can be used. And I know some of you are going to go, well, I know what documentation is. I believe you do. I believe you do. But there are times when we're working with our management teams or our owners, and they forget what documentation is or what could be considered. And I was reading a paper the other day from an attorney who was talking about a case where an organization was being sued because they weren't abiding by the Fair Labor Standard Act. And they were trying to prove that they didn't have 15 employees. And I'm not real sure why they don't know how many employees they have. But of course, they had to submit things into the court and for the case. And what was interesting is kind of well into the case, the plaintiff's attorney requested training logs. Now, we instantly think of certain documents being, requested, but training logs. And what they were doing was they were looking to see how many people were trained on particular dates to determine who the company determined to be employed at that time. And it suddenly dawned on me, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have people asking me all the time, well, what should I be gathering? If I've got, a gentleman called me the other day and said, I just got a call from a civil rights attorney, and it looks like I'm getting sued. And I said, all right, do you have all your documentation together? And he goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, okay, so let's go through the list. So that's what we're going to do today. I want to go through the documentation list. And what was actually cute was the more I was doing this putting this show together, I started realizing, oh my gosh, there's more on here than even I had really thought about quickly. So let's kind of go through first what we would use this for, because think about the government agencies that would be looking at and viewing documentation as valuable. All of them. I can't tell you that any government agency, whether it's state or federal, is going to underestimate or ignore what might be documented. And when we think about reasons, we need to be teaching our management teams and our supervisors. Look, I need documentation for. We start at the very beginning in the recruitment, in the hiring process. I don't want anyone promoted, transferred. I don't want any rate increases administered without documentation. And what about discipline? Yes, people can be verbally told not to do something or verbally applauded for something they're doing great. But how do we prove that happened if we aren't documenting it? And then obviously, we don't terminate anyone unless we've got documentation to support it. Because then what happens? We need documentation for unemployment claims. We need documentation for workers' comp claims. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's an interesting topic to think about. If you aren't talking to your management teams, you're not talking to your ownership to say, look, most of my job in HR is to make sure that we are compliant. And to be compliant, we need to document to prove how we're compliant. So think with me here. If we start out with the very first category, let's just say we need employment documentation. And what does that mean? Well, it starts with the resumes. It starts with applications. Are you getting enough documentation on the candidates to determine why you're hiring them? And what about the background checks? That's documentation. Are you sending an offer letter? Are you then collecting the I-9 with the employment eligibility documentation? And we all know how important that is right now. It is essential. I had someone call me just the other day and she said, I've got close to 1,000 I-9s that I have to audit for my employer. And the sad part is, Pandy, I'm missing some. They just don't exist. And what can you say to her other than applaud her? I just could not applaud her enough, because she knew that with that many people, of course, there are going to be things that slip between the cracks, but she's on top of it. She's doing a self-audit. She's going to make sure that she's got the proper documentation for each and every individual active on their payroll who's actively working. Employment documentation is absolutely essential. And this is an area where I say this needs to stay in HR. If you've got someone maybe completing I-9s for you, or if you've got someone actually doing their own background checks, it still needs to be controlled by HR. And if you don't have a proper HR, make sure you've got someone responsible who understands record keeping to make sure that those documents are there. We did a show last week about mistakes in HR, and what was one of them? Incomplete employee files. And this might be a good, it might be a good real time to remind you. The Department of Labor requires, I think it's like 12 different pieces of information on every employee. So someone needs to be monitoring to make sure that that documentation in itself, that information, is being maintained for every employee that you have. And then second category would be payroll. Obviously, we have to maintain, and payroll records should be kept for 4 years, remember? So it doesn't matter whether you have a CPA doing the payroll. It doesn't matter whether you have an actual professional payroll company. We should be collecting those tax forms. We should be making sure that the direct deposit forms are well documented. We should not be doing anything to their payroll without something acknowledging that that was what the employee wanted, either by a signature or their own submission in the payroll system. Don't play around with payroll in any way, shape, or form. And then again, how about your third category of policies? You see, if you don't have documented policies, and then if you don't have signed forms saying, yes, I understand this is what I need to do, I understand confidentiality, I understand that, whatever agreement you're giving them, I acknowledge my receipt of the handbook. I acknowledge the receipt of the SOP manual. If you don't have that, you need to get it now. You need to have documentation saying, yes, they signed saying they understood the attendance policy, but they keep deviating from it, so that's why we terminated them. Or they knew that they needed to follow certain company policies, but because we had to write them up, or because they weren't following the policies, we can't promote them. Okay, what about number 4 of job-related information? And what does that goes all the way back to the job posting. You see, even a job posting can be subpoenaed. A job posting can be used in a wrongful termination case. What did you post? And in many cases now, we have to include, for some states, the salary range, which means if you publish it, you've got to follow it. In Colorado, they go as far as wanting the benefits to be published in a job posting. Are you doing that? And then performance evaluations. What about, again, job descriptions? Are they accurate? Are they realistic? Are they addressing the needs of the business? And then under the job category, you also want to think about essential work functions. You see, it doesn't have to be when a work-related injury occurs to think about what is actually needed physically to do this job. Even in the interviewing process, an essential work function could be you need to work on site. You can't be remote here. This is not hybrid. Or, yes, it can be hybrid, and that's an essential work function. So job information should not be underestimated. And with that, I also included training. Because again, this attorney is showing us that you can't underestimate the power of being able to prove somebody was trained. Especially, I remember a terrible accident, horrible accident involving a forklift. And when OSHA came in and we went to court, we had to prove that that individual had been trained properly by a legitimate trainer, not just somebody that we have had, working in the company for 30 years. This was a legitimate trainer. We had trained our trainer. So it wasn't the neglect of the company. It was a mistake of the employee that caused the accident. So training will matter. I had a pharmaceutical company actually here years ago, and their clients would come in to make sure that the people working on their projects were trained. Were they of the level of education and sophistication they were looking for? So training documents definitely goes into the job-related category. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Anything having to do with your benefit programs or benefits, period. And I'm in this category, I'm including the government programs of ADA, FMLA, any personal leaves. How much documentation are you requiring with that? How are you approving PTO? Are you adding the details, or is your management team adding the details of why someone got PTO and somebody didn't? Here's one that snagged a call the other day. Somehow the individual was complaining about their 401k enrollment, and the employer was like, well, I just don't understand why they're even concerned about it. I mean, they'll get enrolled. We'll get them in there. I said, no. When's your open enrollment? Do they know, has that been documented? Do they know where to find open enrollment dates? And second of all, are you getting waivers when individuals are able to enroll, but then they decline? You see, these kind of details and this kind of documentation can save you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. I remember one client years ago who had an individual who came and said, wait a minute, I didn't realize I could have signed up for the 401k. I thought if I didn't get it at my time of hire, I was out. And the broker who happened to be there doing a demonstration said, oh, no, you could have enrolled every July and every January. And the employee said, really? I choose to enroll. But guess what? I want to go back to when I could have enrolled that first enrollment after I declined. And they did it. They had to. They had to do an analysis of what she would have gotten into just off the top of her head. Well, I would have enrolled it up to 10%. Of course I would have. The bottom line is they ended up paying the back money of what the investments would have made since that date. They paid the interest. They paid the fines. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a chunk of money this company had to pay because they allowed somebody to get past an open enrollment and didn't get a waiver. I'm getting on a tangent. You get my point, though. We want to make sure. And what about when people return with medical conditions? Are you collecting doctor's forms to make sure that if somebody couldn't work for 2 weeks because of a knee replacement, they now are coming back to work with no restrictions? Don't set yourself up for a workers' comp claim. Don't set yourself up for issues. Make sure you're getting those documents. And again, let's go back to who's controlling that. That's information. All of that in that area should be controlled by your HR person or someone of a responsible position who has a need to know and will know who doesn't have a need to know. And then my last category is really the easiest. We've talked about this over and over and over again. Remind your teams that documents include text messages, emails, phone recordings, voicemails, calendars. If someone finds out that you have a calendar or a journal that can be subpoenaed if it is a work-related item that might contain information that could help in a wrongful termination case or hurt. So you've got to, you absolutely have to help your teams understand if it is work-related, even if it's a personal computer, a personal cell phone, if there's work-related information on there, that can be subpoenaed and used as documentation. I struggle sometimes because yet people either want to document heavy or they don't want to document. And it's a great topic to have just little training sessions with your teams on the proper way to document, what information should be included and what not to include. But I guess maybe we could do another whole show on that, huh? Do you see how passionate I get about this stuff? Oh my gosh. There you go. A lot of information in a small period of time, but I hope you get my point. Documentation is important. And so are you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. We've got a new listener from New Jersey, Scott. Thank you for joining us. And by the way, I just want to say hello to all my friends from the EEOC. I just spent a week out in California with them, getting a certification for mediation. And I made a lot of friends. Just wonderful people. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. Right here at the Human Resource.